For the ancient Egyptians, death was inevitable, but they believed it could be navigated, and even endured with the right knowledge and rituals. Their beliefs about the afterlife were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the underworld, the roles of specific gods, the various components of the soul, and the concept of rebirth. These ideas were closely linked to a range of rituals and ceremonies, many of which are detailed in the Book of the Dead. In this story, we'll delve into these fascinating ancient practices and explore the intricate process of mummification. We'll also take a look at how these funerary practices evolved over time, offering a glimpse into the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian culture. Let's talk about the journey to the underworld and the promise of rebirth for the ancient Egyptians. For them, the underworld, known as Duat, was accessed through their tombs. Upon entering Duat, the soul found itself in a grand hallway filled with impressive statues, many dedicated to the god Horus. It's important to note that the underworld experience differed between commoners and royalty, but every soul ultimately faced Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Osiris had the crucial task of judging whether the deceased had lived a virtuous life, deciding if they deserved to enter a blissful and peaceful afterlife. One of the most critical trials a soul faced in the afterlife came before meeting Osiris. This was the trial overseen by the goddess Mot, who judged the soul using her scales. The deceased had to recite the list of 40 to negative confessions, essentially denying 40 to specific crimes or sins. Afterward, Mot placed the heart of the deceased on one side of the scale, and a feather on the other. If the heart was heavier than the feather, the person could not proceed to the afterlife. But if the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul could then meet Osiris in the field of reeds, the eternal paradise. During the 5th dynasty, Egyptians began to believe in the concept of the field of reeds. This field was envisioned as the final destination for virtuous souls, where those who reached it were granted the privilege of rebirth. Egyptians pictured the field of reeds much like the paradises described in many Abrahamic religions, lush grasslands with beautiful waterfalls and rivers. The field was divided by water into different island-like regions, which could only be navigated by boat. The abundance of water in the field of reeds symbolized rebirth, and was closely connected to the Nile River. The Nile and its surrounding farmlands were the lifeblood of Egypt, providing the prosperity and sustenance that the Egyptians cherished in both life and their vision of the afterlife. Moreover, it wasn't just righteous souls that ended up in the field of reeds. The gods themselves also resided there. Spending time with the gods and sharing their food endowed these souls with godlike characteristics. One of these divine attributes was the ability to communicate with relatives who had passed away earlier, and even converse directly with the gods. One of the most fascinating beliefs in ancient Egyptian culture was their understanding of the soul. Egyptians believed that the soul was composed of several different parts, each responsible for a different function. According to their cosmology, the world was created by the god Adam, who infused magic into everything on earth to bring order out of chaos. As a result, everything, and everyone, contained some residual magic. For humans, this magic manifested as the soul. The number of parts that made up the soul varied depending on the period or dynasty, but most funerary traditions recognized at least 5 distinct components. First of all, Ket refers to the physical form that the soul was attached to. Without the Ket, the soul could not be judged in the underworld. Then there is the Sa, a spiritual body formed by the soul that interacts in the afterlife with other souls or gods. The soul could only take the form of Sa if all the funerary rites and rituals were successfully performed. The Ib, or heart, was a particularly significant part of the soul. Egyptians believed the Ib took shape from a drop of blood from the mother's heart. Because of this origin, the Ib was considered responsible for a person's emotions and thoughts. One of the most well-known parts of the ancient Egyptian soul was the Ka. The Ka represented the vital essence that separated the living from the dead. It was believed that the goddess Meskenet, or Heket, depending on the region, breathed the Ka into infants at the moment of their birth. Upon death, the Ka left the body. However, it still needed sustenance, which is why food and drink offerings were placed in graves. These offerings were meant to nourish the Ka in the afterlife. Another particularly interesting part of the soul was the Ba. The Ba was responsible for a person's uniqueness and personality. Like the Ka, the Ba also left the body after death, often depicted as a human-headed bird. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom symbolized their owner's Ba. In the afterlife, the Ka and Ba were reunited to form the Ak, which represented the person's intellect. The living had to sustain the deceased's Ak through offerings and rituals, allowing the dead to transform into a sort of ghost. Especially during the 20th dynasty, Egyptians believed that these spirits still influenced the living and could intervene if summoned, or provoke. A lesser-known but fascinating part of the soul was the Shut, or shadow. In ancient Egypt, Shadows were significant because they were believed to contain part of a person's identity. The assistant of Anubis, the god of death, was also a shadow. Another mysterious part of the soul was the sekhem, often described by Egyptologists as the living force or power that preserves the soul in the underworld. Finally, the jinn was a particularly important soul fragment, representing a person's name. More than just a name, the jinn embodied the deceased's memories and experiences. As long as someone spoke the name of the dead, their soul remained alive. This is why names were inscribed in all burial grounds, ensuring the soul's preservation.